We use a framework called Ionic, and with a tool called Cordova, it essentially allows us to code as if it was like a website. As me and Blake were talking about earlier, this website language using HTML, CSS, JavaScript, except for this tool, right? It'll essentially generate that website code and let us put out a iOS app or an Android app, right? It is kind of like the final step. So this makes it really convenient for us to have just one code base instead of two, both for iOS and Android. It also helped us because we have a limited amount of developers and a limited amount of time. So we didn't have to repeat any steps in order to get out two different applications. So Blake, when you started working with us, what was your impression of Ionic? What did you like about it? What did you not like about it? And what was your whole impression of putting out multi-platform apps regards to the native iOS or the native Android code bases?
First, we can talk about like my experience then and my thoughts then, and then we can kind of transition to my thoughts now after a couple of years in
Sure.
the industry. When I was looking at it, because at that point when I was starting to work on and play around with Drive, I had released two apps in the iOS App Store, and this hybrid framework, this Ionic, this was the first time that I had seen it, and it was really interesting. And it's really, we talked about magic earlier when it comes to computers, and that's another thing that almost seems magical, right?
Yeah.
Like, how do you write HTML code and then it becomes a mobile application? And it's really, really powerful in that sense. And you brought up a lot of good points and a lot of reasons why it's so important and so powerful. The fact that you don't have two separate code bases you have to worry about. You're not building an app for an iOS phone and building an app for an Android. You're building one. You have a small team, so your time is limited, right? Those are all benefits of it. But like most things in the world, there are pros and cons to each thing. So some of the things that I didn't like about it was you lose a lot of micro level interactions, right? It makes it a little more difficult if you were doing a complex app. If you were trying to integrate with like the camera, or if you're trying to get Bluetooth, like various things of that nature. And this is where another thing people are very passionate about, right? Like native versus hybrid. And again, I kind of go back to the concept of choosing the technology that best suits you, your team, your goal, your vision, what have you. And in your case, right, that's the perfect thing. It's something that you can develop on with one code base, with limited developers. They don't have to learn a new language if they already know web languages, and you get an Android and an iOS app. And that's really, really powerful. And there's a reason why that's becoming so popular, and the shift is going towards that. But it does come at a cost, which can, in some cases, be like harder to get up and running. I know that we ran into a lot of like dependency issues, and sometimes it's hard to get it to actually run or to compile down. But overall, it's really impressive piece of framework that allows you to do that.
I definitely enjoyed it as far as the user input app, getting it off the ground, getting my idea out there. I think that's part of the reason why you and Matt wanted to work with me, is just because I was able to put an idea out into the world so quickly, right? Without much knowledge of coding in general. As I've been progressing forward, right, and I'm starting to play around with the idea of actually connecting to like a smart pair of dumbbells or a cardio machine or your watch, right? Which is kind of the Drive Fitness vision. You're right. It is harder to make Bluetooth connections from this multi-platform language. It's been challenging, and I think that could be a big problem with it in the future. I'm hoping that as it develops and it becomes more of an industry standard, that there are easier ways to connect to Bluetooth and other devices. But it's definitely something that I get concerned about as far as like the long-term vision of the software. You know, I could definitely see that being a reason why someday we have to move towards a native app. So hopefully not. We're not quite ready yet anyways, but that is something I do worry about.
Well, and so one thing that they try to do to negate that, right, is the ability to, so for those of you that don't know Ionic, it basically, there's a package for Bluetooth interaction that you can install and you can use to have your app interact with that. There's one for the camera, there's one for GPS, things of that nature. And if one of those don't suit your needs, this is complicated stuff, but you can build your own, right? So you could keep your Ionic app, and then you could build your own. Okay, here's my iOS Bluetooth package and here's my Android one, and then still have it link up. But again, that's pros and cons to that as well.
Yeah.
But it definitely is, long term, when it comes to hybrid, is something that is talked about to this day. So Airbnb got rid of all their React Native, which is another hybrid framework like Ionic, in favor of going natively. And there are a lot of other kind of industry leaders that have done the same, but there's also some that push forward. So for example, if you ever heard of Discord, it's a messaging platform, kind of like Slack, but for gamers and for the gaming community. That mobile application is built completely with React Native, which is another hybrid framework. And it's kind of impressive when you think about it. You're like, wow, I would have never have guessed that, because they do it so well. So it's something that you should be thinking about, but I think there are ways around it. So I think time will tell kind of what path you have to take.
Yeah, I think we're going to start putting GPS into the app for like tracking if you're just running around like your neighborhood. So that might be one of our first challenges, to see how well that GPS plugin works and how it kind of appears on iOS versus Android. I'm hoping that one at least they've worked all the kinks out. So the last thing that kind of you focus on the app was a lot of UI improvements. For those of you who have used the app, Blake actually designed like the login page and some of those like home screen images and just the layout there, which I think looked beautiful. What were some challenges? What did you learn about UI development during that time period? Do you have any like quick tips for people, when it comes to using CSS and certain styling techniques?
To design that, I had to think about a couple of different things. You had to think about the app itself, right? What makes the most sense from a logistic standpoint, from a user flow standpoint, what makes the best user experience, and then think about kind of modern examples. So one of the biggest things, and I think it goes this way with art or anything, right? Draw inspirations, looking at other workout applications, seeing how they do things, and then figuring out something that solves your problem and is unique. And so it started out with just drawing it on a piece of paper and then kind of going in there. And talking about CSS, right? Like I'm sure you've experienced this, where you change things and then maybe nothing happens, or it's really hard. Maybe there's just like one issue and you're trying to get that one thing lined up, and it's really hard. So it's a lot of trial and error, right? Like it's a lot of just, all right, let me increment this number by one and let me keep doing that until I figure out what's going on or solves the problem.
Yeah, I don't know if you taught me how to do this or where I learned this, but I think if you're new to CSS and troubleshooting problems that way, the way you got to do it is you got to go into like the Google Chrome developer tools, right? So as he was saying, sometimes you write some CSS, and because there's so many different rules layered into your app on the different pages and everything, that styling might not hit the right point and might not change the color or the size the way you want it to. So instead of changing the code, compiling it, and taking a look at it every time, you can actually go into the developer tools and you can edit all the CSS variables right there, right? So you can change values on the fly and experiment with the way different things look without actually changing your code base. You're just kind of like making changes in the browser, to kind of test things out. And then once you find out what you like, then you can go put it into your code base so that you don't have to waste time essentially compiling your app every time you want to test a new style.
Yeah.
So I think that would be my biggest advice as far as how to work with styling. But
yeah, and also too, that's one of the benefits of Ionic, right? Like that's not something I can do when I'm doing native development.
Yeah.